Jody's expecting me to talk about technology, and I will some, but at the end, but there's another theme that I've heard a lot that I want to bring in to bear. I want also, like Tom, to recognize the audience. This is an amazing group to be dropped into. And it's interesting, our language gets in the way, so we say that so often that we often don't mean it. And I mean it. I'm trying to figure out a way to say it so I mean it. It is the practitioners. It's wonderful to have dominated practitioners. I was amazed by the students and their contributions, their insightful contributions, and many of them Cody related. Cody's doing something right about getting people to be willing to speak up. But there's almost an excluded community here that I'm going to speak on behalf of. I'm going to wear a scarlet E for evaluation. Mostly because so many people have mentioned it in one way or the other and acted as if it's just trouble. And I want to take that on a little bit. I also want, in the spirit of there being no outsiders, not to treat funders and people who represent foundations as outsiders, because I don't think there are many people, not only among the people in this room and not only the people that were impaneled, but people more generally who come from those communities whom I've met who want to be doing the wrong that they're described as doing. So let me talk about that a little bit. And if evaluation is an uncomfortable word, let's use assessment, let's use epistemology, let's use knowledge. I think there's hardly anybody in this room who doesn't want to know how things are going. So I had some examples as I listened. Peter talked about from a community going from 95% unemployment to full employment. We heard about Christ Church going from the second worst community economically to the second best. I was sitting in the front row, but I could hear people respond to those numbers. Those numbers are meaningful to you too. There are things worth counting, and the question is what to count and how to count. Jim Deers talked about the number of parks, the number of gardens. When he said every neighborhood, that's a claim, an important and interesting claim that I think one way or the other we need to, every neighborhood had achieved something. You just told us about communities wanting tangible benefits. That's about information, which I think, let's put it this way, who is it among us who wants to count the wrong thing, including all the evaluators? This is not about people not wanting to know. It's about a relationship having gone awry between whom we call evaluators and whom we call the community. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. I thought that term, the dance of deception, was very interesting. And the way Tim expanded on it for us. Don Campbell, whom many of us know, talked about this as the over-advocacy trap. Getting ourselves in a situation where we have to promise more than we can possibly deliver in order to be funded. And the distortions that creates on both sides of the fence, not only in terms of what one knows and what one counts, but what one does in the community. So I think, for me, it's not about abandoning evaluation or even the aspiration behind it, but about getting that right. It's almost, for me, as if we need a Hippocratic oath for evaluators. Evaluator, do no harm. Because often, because of the relationship, they're provoked to come into communities and end up distorting through what ends up being counted, not because there's anybody there who doesn't want to know. So I could go on too long about this, so let me say a little bit more. First, I think we need to know, if we're going to look at science as a model, we should look at the beginnings of science as a model. And we should appreciate very different ways of knowing things. Somebody said once, probably it's been said many times, the whole world is reinvented in every drop of water. If you know how to look at that drop of water carefully and extract information from it, then it is, as a case study, a place where a lot can be learned. I have a friend who's a neurobiologist who says he only studies single cells. and he studies essentially the pumps inside and outside the cells. And he said he is so focused on the single cell that he considers anything outside a cell sociology. But what he does is look carefully and honestly at what he sees. There was somebody else who wrote once that in what is now we can think of as where evaluation is now in this world, in the world in which we're trying to operate, that we do not need our Johannes Kepler, said this friend of mine, Bill McGuire. He said, we need our Tycho Brahe. Does anybody know who Tycho Brahe was? He was Kepler's teacher, who went to an island off Denmark and carefully recorded every observation meticulously, precisely, so that when Kepler came along, he had good data to respond to build a good theory. And I think we're at the point where it's useful to us, and not just scientific, to gather good data. Under what conditions do the kinds of results that Jim Deers and others talked about, which one are they most likely to result? Let's get out of the dance of deception. I remember once somebody said a wonderful thing took place in Russia during the communist era. We pretended to work and they pretended to pay us. I think there are two sides to that equation. And one side is that the community be honest about what it's achieving, that it recognize what there is to be learned in failure, that it recognize the boundary conditions on success, that it collect its data well. We do work with Bill Gates. And I have to say, for me, the proudest thing he ever said in writing once about our work with him is that our team got people to tell the truth. It isn't that they didn't want to know the truth. It was very hard to extract in order that they could improve their own model. So there are foundations, there are funders out there who want to know better so that they can improve. And they understood, as well as you do, the value of learning from failure. So Gates says, for example, if I'm not wasting 20% of my money, I'm not investing well. I must take risks. But if I'm going to take risks, I want to learn when things go awry. So I think we have an obligation to enter into an authentic relationship with funders where we can tell them what it turns out more often than we expect they actually want to know. So enough on that. Just a very brief comment about conceit, the rise. And let me say a little bit about technology, because this is another place in which things have changed dramatically. People are talking about blogs as ways of gathering information from the field. I think sometimes successful and sometimes not. But there's something more profound going on because of Google. I don't know. I read an article a couple of years ago, but then I've seen it come home in a variety of ways, that the whole doing of science may be changing from deductive to inductive. Because once everything is out there on the net, you can begin to gather all these examples and put together science in such a way that the deductive experiment is what's left over once you have gathered all that. I think we can look at the proliferation of ABCD as a number of models, which if we write about and communicate with one another effectively, figure out how to assort them, to assemble them, to understand them, are honest about what they tell us, from that accumulation, a body of knowledge of useful not only to us, but to the next generations we're all concerned about can be proposed. So if I have a technology strategy to propose, it's how to take advantage of this on behalf of our collective learning.